Hello, friends, fans, and dairy products of all ages. This is Cheese of Ages again with another video for the day. And that's going to be talking about Talon again, because as some of you may know, I'm a Talon main, in the sense that I'm not a Talon one-trick pony. A main is someone that plays a champion, that specific champion mostly, in a specific role. Or just like generally plays it a lot. A one-trick pony is someone that plays only that champion regardless of where they are put on the map. And like new Talon isn't as one-trick pony capable as he used to be, but the fact that role selection is there like makes it up for that somewhat. And new Talon just have various strengths and has been shifted around a little bit, and could, I suppose, if you were good enough at playing him, you could play him in other places. I'm rambling. This is basically just going to be me rambling a bit about Talon, even though I did that already in my update to the Talon main reason video, in which I probably already defined what a main was, so forgive my rambling. The main inspiration for this video was the response on the Talon main subreddit to the Talon Rework. It's been better lately if people actually like discussing builds and viabilities and stuff, and being what a subreddit for mains is supposed to be, and that's like discussing the champion in its current form and being a place where people who want to learn the champion can go to learn the champion from people who play it obsessively and thus intimately know it. But for a long time, and even to an extent today, but much less, the Talon main subreddit was a place where you go to see a whole bunch of people bitching and moaning and whining obsessively about their obsession with the damage crutch they've lost. So many people just relying so much on the fact that old Talon did a shit ton of AoE damage instantaneously. Because, clearly a playstyle revolving around diving onto the enemy carry and exploding, and not caring whether or not you lived or died because, and I quote, you were useless in team fights anyway. That's a direct quote from somebody that complained about this, and it wasn't refuted, because it's kind of true. Because apparently being a suicidal person that leaves your team in a 4v5 situation if you're CC'd is healthy gameplay. Hell, I'll give credit to a couple of freaking Talon mains that that openly admitted that the gameplay of just if you're fed anybody within 800 units of you just dies is not super healthy gameplay. Kudos to them. Yeah, those people that say on the Talon main Reddit that agree that just being a goddamn nuclear missile that can't be counterplayed is not necessarily healthy for the game as a whole. But the majority are like, wah, give me my damage back. Give me my binky back or I'll tell mommy, for 2 weeks there. Sure, Talon is a little bit weaker than he should be right now. He just needs a little bit of a tickle upwards. But goddamn, the Talon main Reddit was goddamn stupid. It's like, oh, his kit doesn't really work to trick his passive that well because it's feels clunky. The cooldowns don't enable smooth application of your passive and easy triggering of it. It's like, okay, two of his spells and hits of spells stack is passive. Two of his spells hit twice. I'll admit one is hard to make hit twice, but two of them have the capability to hit a target 2 times. They've reconfigured his Q to not only give you a gap closer so you can get in better position to hit with those 2 double hits, but also applies a hit itself. and get you next to the person, and has this now smoother auto attack animation to where the follow-up auto attack that automatically happens is as fast as an auto attack reset after the application of the Q that I'm talking about. And also, they amped up the movement speed steroid on your ultimate so that you can position yourself optimally to apply your double hits. I don't know. Is a kit specifically designed to stack your passive fast? Designed to stack your passive fast? If you're having trouble stacking your passive, when your kit's like all double hits and like repositioning, then maybe you should get better at the fucking kit. And you're saying it's feeling clunky and the cooldowns are too high. Why aren't you fucking building cooldown reduction? Stop complaining about things and refusing to build the items that fix it. A common theme in that 2-week period. It's like, oh, he has to be in combat so long, but he's squishy. Freaking buy the freaking item that fixes that and all your other complaints. Fucking build Black Cleaver, you motherfucker. It gives you more health, more movement speed, a shit ton of count of cooldown reduction, a decent amount of AD, a large amount of effective damage, and its armor shred capabilities, which you apply really fast with your passive, and also an AoE because you have multi-hit AoEs that almost automatically apply double stacks to multiple targets. And also it gets you movement speed when you hit with anything, which also addresses your freaking complaint about in-combat mobility, even though you have one of the lowest cooldown gap closers in the entire fucking game, not even including your E, which is a pre-fight positioning tool, or a post-fight escape. Which also freaking, why are you complaining about having like less escapes on Talon when he has more than he used to? And the ones he had before are either the same or better. You're fucking stupid. Sure, his Q is not a blink anymore, and that's weaker, and it doesn't have as much range, so you theoretically can't jump over walls as easily with it. But your freaking ultimate has a much higher movement speed steroid on it, and your gap closer is on a much lower cooldown, and you have the E to jump over a wall. So you have your escapes up more often, and you have an extra one. How do you have fewer escapes? You fucking moron. And if you're complaining about in-combat mobility, build cooldown reduction so you have a gap closer on a 3-second cooldown in the late game, and also freaking Black Cleaver and Ghost Blade give you movement speed and combat. Oh, and maybe you should stop buying lucidity boots for your cooldown reduction completion. Those of you that have this complaint and build cooldown reduction, maybe you should build freaking Swifty boots, which give you in-combat mobility. But lucidity boots are a waste of fucking time on Talon, because so many items are accessible to Talon that give you lots of cooldown reduction. All of a sudden you're saying, oh, but like, jeez, my damage. And oh, like, I need to go like Ghost Blade into freaking a Dusk Blade for my damage. You dumb fuck. Ghost Blade to Black Cleaver, first 2 items, is by far the most used build and the highest win rate by a large margin. I'm not saying you can't carry a game and go like 22 freaking 6 or lower on Ghost Blade 2 Dusk Blade, but Black Cleaver is second item the majority of the time and most successfully for a goddamned reason. Freaking 30% cooldown reduction at 2 items at mid-game, if not sooner than mid-game. And both of them give you everything you need. But my damage. Bitch, the armor shred gives you bonus damage. Admittedly, Duskblade has slightly more single target damage. But that is irrelevant in a teamfight situation. Spoilers, a lot of the Talon main subreddit complain about Talon being shit in teamfights. Not only the armor shred not only gives you bonus damage, but in a teamfight situation, you're AoE applying the armor shred to everybody in the range of your AoEs. You're giving bonus damage to any AD damage coming on that target from your allies. So it's still in teamfights better single target damage, and over a longer period of time presents you with much more damage than Duskblade does to a single target when you're alone, even. Because even like if you manage to get your passive on that sucker, it's gonna almost immediately blight any remaining stacks. All of your shit hits twice. So over the course of your full entire combination, you've fully stacked Black Cleaver immediately on the target and lowered their armor 30%, which applies before all other forms of armor penetration. So, let me give you a brief refresher on how armor works. 1 point to armor means the enemy has to effectively deal 1% more of your maximum health to kill you. So, effectively by shredding 30% of their armor, let's say they have 100 armor, you're effectively reducing their effective health, the amount of health you have to take from them to kill them, by 30%. Mind you, like the majority of squishies are not going to have 100 armor, and targets that have more than 100 armor, you're stripping actually more of their effective health away. But still, even with like lower scales of armor, this is still bonus damage, and it just scales up the more they try to resist it. While like Duskblade, bonus damage is okay. I'm not saying it's bad. It's just there's more than just the team damage augmenting that happens. I'm not even gonna like fully stress the fact that like, oh, if there's AD AoEs, you're giving even more damage to your team because you've applied this armor shred in an AoE. So they're getting bonus damage on multiple targets, thus giving you even more damage than the single target damage would be giving you. I'm not going to go into that in great detail. Let's just talk about the fundamental core aspect of why Talon isn't super great in team fights. And why freaking Ghostblade to Black Cleaver is such a helpful thing in that. His passive marks, in which he must stack 3 of and then auto attack to trigger his passive, those marks last 6 seconds. His lowest cooldown AoE applier of those marks has a 9-second cooldown at default. If you go 20% cooldown reduction by mid-game, you still need to 20% cooldown reduction. It's still pretty much completely impossible to maintain marks on multiple targets unless you hit with both tiers of Rake, which is inconsistent. If you just bump it up 10% more to 30%, then you have the same, actually slightly more, of that window, whether or not you hit with the second hit of Rake. And if you hit with the second hit of Rake, you have a larger window. So, instead of having to delay your AoE application several seconds to make sure you maintain the passive on multiple targets, with 30% cooldown reduction, the cooldown of Rake is pretty much completely a non-factor in the delay. So you're taking like an ability's cooldown completely out of the equation. the delay you would need to do is like minimal at best. You need at least 30% cooldown reduction to have a plausible chance of applying your passive proc to multiple targets in a team fight. And I'm not going to go like into super enormous amounts of math to like back up that point, but like if you check the math yourself, you'll find it's true. I mean, the window isn't enormous at 30% cooldown reduction, but it's freaking there and can be done. Especially if you have your ult. If you have your ult, it's possible to do it at 20, but it's incredibly like fiddly and not as consistent. It's 30%. 30%, if you throw your ult in there, it's easy as pie to get multiple procs off without really delaying much at all. So anyway, I lost my train of thought. Oh, I know what the point I was going to next. Let's talk about how the game goes in most instances. The majority of the time, for several seasons, the game games rarely go to full build. And on nearly every game I ever play, I not including complete boots, I only get to 3 items before the game ends. Which pretty much means third item is endgame. And second item is mid-game. So, if you don't get Black Cleaver's second item, for the majority of games, you'll be going into team fights with insufficient amounts of cooldown reduction and greatly diminished team fighting consistency. So I wonder why, like, Talon is shit at team fighting. I mean, he's still weak at team fighting with this, because he's just weak at team fighting in general, because he's just an assassin, but he's actually a lot more consistent in team fighting with the most popular and most successful build, and that's one of the major reasons it's the most popular and most successful build. Not to mention the extra added consistency of AoE applications of Black Cleaver that Talon provides. So yeah, your damage, Black Cleaver. You're diminishing your damage capacity by going Ghost Blade, Dusk Blade. You're lowering your damage. So yeah, this isn't as big of a detriment if you get blue buff, because that gives you 10% cooldown reduction. But yeah, that's not something you can consistently rely on. And with the Ghostblade Duskblade Rush, you're still going into mid-game with only 20%, unless you waste your money buying Lucidity Boots. So, yeah, I suppose you could manage with this build if you consistently could get blue buff, which is, I imagine it could happen. Never hit blue buff in my games, so maybe that's influencing my bias. And you like buy a subpar boot. You could get it by mid-game. Or you could do the smart thing and not get Lucidity Boots, and instead get the wait 200 more gold for a freaking Caulfield's Warhammer, skipping boots entirely, and then get a different type of boot that's actually better. So too many people buy Lucidity Boots and mistake it working for it being good. It's 10% cooldown reduction. It's gonna be good on Talon, because it's 10% cooldown reduction. Is it gonna be optimal on Talon? Fuck no. Buying Lucidity Boots to cap off your final 10% cooldown reduction is saying, okay, I'm gonna never buy Maul of Memortius or Death's Dance, because now they have dead stats on them. So I'm gonna, like, if I want lifesteal, I have to go with either, like, Ravenous Hydra or the inferior Bloodthirster. That doesn't scale as well as Death's Dance does with it. and neither of those items has as much versatility as either of those items do. Well, Ravenous Hydra is really good. So yeah. Don't buy Lucidity Boots. Buy Swifty Boots or a Defensive Boot in that spot. If you want to rush to 40% cooldown reduction, or you want to rush to 30% and you're not going Black Cleavers for some fucking reason, instead just skip boots entirely and go for a freaking Caulfield's Warhammer, which is just 200 gold more. You won't really super notice the loss in movement speed if you whip Ghostblade and you have your E and you use it well, especially if you have Storm Raider's Surge as your Keystone Mastery. More on Keystone Masteries a little bit later. So you can go Caulfield's Warhammer, then get boots, then complete Caulfield's Warhammer into either a Death Stance or a Maw of Memorius, depending on the situation. If you wanted to, you could theoretically also go Essence Reaver in that spot, but it's subpar because it doesn't have its own power spike, unlike Death Stance and Maw of Memorius. Those have their own power spike. Essence Reaver is basically just numbers until you get more items on it. But if you did choose to go Essence Reaver, even though 3 items is usually end game and you won't have the 4th item to make it good, you could theoretically go into Infinity Edge, which is kind of good on Talon anyway, for 40% crit chance, 50% more crit chance damage, a decent amount of AD, and maybe get like a Zeal item like Phantom Dancer for increased defense in dueling situations, or Static Shiv for a bit more burst damage. Even though you won't get any AD from either, you'll have 70% crit chance, so there's a 70% chance your attacks will do double damage. And the attack speed will be the equivalent you lost from Yomu's Ghostblade nerf, which I'll just talk about in a second. So it's not awful, it's not great, and you'll almost never build it because most games don't last that long. I'd suggest either going Death Dance or Maw of Memorius and building into like a Duskblade, but it is possible to skip that last 10% cooldown reduction and instead go to like Duskblade after Black Cleaver, because you can sit on 30% for a while. I should really write this down instead of rambling on about it and talking really fast, because you're probably either like not gonna watch this again to get this information again, or you just straight can't follow it because I'm rambling. But yeah, core items. Talon has a really small core. Ghostblade, Black Cleaver. From in the 3rd slot, you either cap your cooldown reduction there, or you get like a Duskblade or something else. The 3rd slot's a very situational item. If you need the magic resist Maw there, if there's not a distinct amount of AP trouble on the field, you can go Death's Dance for some extra damage, some sustain, and it's damage reduction that's on it for your closure cooldown reduction. Or if you feel that 30% cooldown reduction is sufficient enough at this point in the game and you can afford to delay it a little bit, although you should cap it at some point, you can go Duskblade in that slot. If you want to go kooky, you can go Essence Reaver in that slot for the cooldown reduction cap, but then that keeps you from getting Death Dance or Maw of Memorius. If you go Death Dance, and you still need some AP later, you can go into Edge of Night. If you get Maw of Memorius and need even more AP, you can go Edge of Night. You know, after a freaking 2 item rush, his build is flexible as fuck and very situational. If you want like this in a concise written format, just let me know, and I'll like freaking break down it. Just put all this freaking flood of information into an actual like guide. As you can tell, I'm not like high rank, but I know a freaking lot about Talon. And I could support it with like maths and concise arguments because my game theory is good. I'm just super goddamn out of practice, and I've never like climbed up super high. But yeah. uh, rambling on, talking about the Ghost Blade nerf is another stupid complaint that the Talon Man's Reddit had in the first 2 weeks. People were like rushing Duskblade first item, even though it's like super clunky as a first item because of that BF sword in it. And it still worked occasionally because it's okay, but it's suboptimum. All the only nerfs that Duskblade got in the patch that people are complaining nerfed the shit out of it was lethality, which is getting buffed sometime in the near future, and doesn't affect really the item much at all because it's still just as good late game. And plus they reduced the cost of the item by the entire worth of the armor penetration that you lost, so it's more cost effective. And the other thing that lost was the attack speed buff on the active of Ghostblade, which doesn't hurt Talon as much as it hurts other people that build it, like ADCs, because attack speed's the freaking stat that all Talon mains would say was complete garbage on Talon if you suggested getting any of it from any other source. It was a really good bonus, but it's not the central focus of the item. It's still decent AD, cooldown reduction. It now has out-of-combat movement speed on it, so it has even more movement speed on it, and it still has its movement speed active to help you do your like Talon engagey things. And did I mention cooldown reduction, which is really fucking nice on Talon? There's a reason why people have now almost always build it first on Talon, and it's still there's a reason why it's pretty much the only lethality item that Talon isn't. It's only the only lethality item Riot's not going to buff when they buff lethality. You know, which leads me to believe they're not buffing lethality, but they're going to buff the items with lethality on it. So there's that. But yeah, Levi says Ghostblade is shit. It's stupid as fuck. It's still everything you want, and it's cost effective as shit. Same thing as applies to Black Cleaver. It's everything you want, and the amounts you want them to be at for its gold efficiency. You know, it's really gold efficient, that 2-item rush, just like really good. It just gets like so much stat for your buck. It's good shit. So anyway, yeah. His playstyle is drastically different. I won't lie and say it's not. His burst is slower. He doesn't have as much burst. Riot has said that they're gonna buff lethality items and see how that affects Talon. And if he still needs buffs after that, they'll give him a few more buffs. But they're careful about buffing him because he's one of those champions, and statistics back it up, that with few games, you're shit. But once you have a lot of games under your belt, you got a really good win rate. People that have main Talon for a lot of games are posting like 60% to nearly 70% win rates on him. And statistics sites, even though the play rate on Talon is really low, the gap between few games and a lot of games on him is pretty goddamn large, even for like high skill floor champions. It's big. Although, like, just say it's the same because of the number skewing. One would think that a higher play rate would make the handful of games number even lower, though, and they, like, people with more games under their belt even higher, though. A higher play rate should separate those, in theory. So more people are playing it, that means more people have fewer games. And more people have like more games. So this sample size should be theoretically a little bit more skewed towards them. In theory. Of course, like few people playing it at higher level, it means they're more dedicated to it. So it balances out as far as the statistics skewing goes. And again, yeah, I'm rambling. But one more thing that the Reddit is still to this day stupid about, and it's almost meme levels on that freaking subreddit, about the buffs coming in 7.1 being bad, because like, oh, it's a small amount of mono regen, and a little bit more sustain on the Q. Because when you execute a minion or a unit with your Q, you get some healing. It's just a teeny tiny little bit of more healing on that, like 3 per rank on it. It's like, that's shit. I complained about my late game, yet you're giving me sustain. Well, you also complained about his difficulty in ranged matchups, which and the increased ability to spam, and also a slightly increased sustain in lane helps that very slightly. So it addresses problems, and also an easier time in lane means an easier time roaming, which means it amplifies your core strength, and also in a more consistent early game leads to a more consistent late game. So these buffs, while small and not going to be a huge deciding factor in fixing Talon in their eyes, it's not going to make him super high win rate from these slight buffs. They are good buffs. They don't increase his power a huge amount, but they improve his consistency, which is the issue. And this is backed up by Riot's later released reasoning for the buffs. The intention of the buffs was to buff Talon's fallback pattern and consistency, which is what I just went over. So I was saying that before they even released that. So game knowledge. Why is this just me? I'm Talon main subreddit. I'm pretty damn sure it's pretty obvious what those buffs do and what their purpose was, and that they were at least okay buffs. I mean, they're not huge. They're not going to fix much of anything, but it's going to be good buffs. It's going to help a little, a tiny bit. I'm sure those 60 to 70% win rate Talons are going to just nudge their win rate up a couple of points. Because, spoilers, a lot of Talon's early game is freaking super spammy, and one of his major combos involves executing a minion to get rapidly closer to your ranged opponent to sling a W at them they didn't expect, because it's from super far away. And now you could do that a little bit more. And now you can spam your shit a little more. Now you have consistency. And hair better, arranged matchups. Final point. I just remembered I didn't address this when I said I would address Keystone Masteries later. I'm just gonna hit this quickly because this video is already 33 minutes long. Keystone Masteries. Storm Raiders is good for skirmishing because you can chase your opponents a little bit more easily, and also get away from targets that have slows, or you don't need to be next to very long more easily. Thunderlord's Decree is good in matchups where you need just a little bit more burst to secure the kill on a squishy matchup. And while getting away doesn't matter, it's Storm Raider Surge is still really good for consistent application of your passive, though, to get that extra burst of movement speed to make sure you get that auto attack in. Still good in all matchups. The Thunderlord's Decrees gives you a good earlier game because of that burst could get you a good early kill. But it falls off in the late game where it practically much doesn't do anything past mid game. And although it's not super popular and you pretty much will never see it, unless if you face me, I use it a lot. Deathfire Touch is also a viable Keystone Mastery because his Q is now a single target spell that procs it, and all of his AoEs hit twice, so you pretty much don't lose any duration on the burn. And it's good for matchups in which you don't want to be next to the person at all because it's a Darius, so he can keep you next to him no matter what. Or a Tom Kench, where if you go next to them at all, you're dead. Or things like that. Because you could just sling your Q out there, and your outgoing Q will do as much damage as your old outgoing Q used to do before it was damage nerfed. And it applies in AoEs and scales better into late games. So it will provide a lot more late game damage than Thunderlord's Decree. And also, instead of precision, giving you like 8%, giving you 8 lethality. You'll get 7% armor penetration, which is percentage penetration, which is about the same amount as the lethality will give you at most stages of the game. Because if armor scales up, also scales up the percentage armor penetration, but you get all of what you would get right away, and it scales better with armor than lethality does. But lethality scales slightly better with less armor. Only slightly. So pretty much the two like penetration masteries are nearly identical. Personally, I'd say the percentage penetration is slightly better because of how it applies in sequence. Because percentage penetration applies before flat penetration, meaning that 7% makes your lethality scale better. Because the lethality is getting through less armor, slightly less armor. So it's just a little bit better. So yeah, there you go. That's a thorough breakdown. Some people have also been saying that the Bloodlust one that gives you an increased lifesteal at low health, the lower your health gets, might be good with Ravenous Hydra, but that's only bonus damage on the AoE, not the primary target you're hitting. It's only the radius, not the target. So you're not going to be doing much damage on it unless you're hitting with the active to the target you're focusing. So it's not a lot of bonus damage. Even if it would all hit, it's still not a lot of bonus damage because Ravenous Hydra only gets 50% of your lifesteal, and it relies on you being at low health to get a large amount of lifesteal from that. And at maximum, it's not a huge amount of lifesteal anyway. And you're not going to benefit from the lifesteal in the large majority of situations because lifesteal only applies on auto attacks, and you're not going to be standing in a combat for prolonged periods of time just stabbing people over and over again with an auto attack proccing you lifesteal. It's good for split pushing because you're like getting lifesteal off of minion waves, but it's just overall not as bang for buck as the other masteries, and a MOBA bang for buck is really super goddamn important. So yeah, it might be a thing if you're going for a tank Talon build, but tank Talon is not something I'd recommend. Like bruiser items Talon, hell yeah, go for it. But yeah, not full on tank Talon. It's just not going to work for you, even with your how much scaling you have giving you and how much damage you can do. Base it's not really overall going to be super great. A hybrid though, a mix of the two, good stuff. Anyway, She's of Ages signing off. This will be my last Talon video for a while, I promise. If I do make a written guide, it'll be in the video description of this video, and I might mention it in passing if I add it in another video. But anyway, goodbye.